Hey everyone, it is my week again to share on our City of Refuge online message series. I don't know what to call this strange time of uploading our messages and posting it on social media. But I'm excited to share with you guys and hoping we can have some fun discussion either in the comment section or in the COR chat if anyone's on in that message group. But today we are covering Genesis 26, verse 1 through 6, also verses 12 through 14. I apologize for any noise you guys hear in the background. I think my wife is upstairs cleaning, maybe, and the kids are playing, so I'm sure you'll hear random noises. And I'm sure at one point one of the dogs will bark to go outside or inside at least 12 times. So hopefully we could keep it fun, or at the very least, you can be patient with me. So a couple quick announcements. We will be meeting as a team over the next week or two to kind of decide how we want to move forward with some of the stuff that we had planned for the rest of the year, especially kind of going into May, and kind of what we're looking at, any sort of like general, especially considering as the state and the federal government decides what some of their upcoming recommendations are. So stay tuned to any announcements concerning that. So without further ado, we'll hop into Genesis 26 and some of the questions that we are asking this week. So starting in verse 1, it says, "Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time." So we're starting to see a pattern here, very similar to 2020. "And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar." For those of you who are familiar with this story, also Abraham's sort of journey of famine and dealing with Abimelech. Abimelech is, some scholars believe, is not a name but a title, or a sort of like in the same way our Bible translated almost as a name and then him a king as a title, but almost sort of like someone could have a position in a family or a clan. And so Abimelech may be sort of the name of whoever's that leader. For anyone who read the 007 series or watched the film, there was a theory for some time that James Bond was a title and not his actual name, and Skyfall ruined that theory. But sort of similar idea that maybe Abimelech is a title. So because you see that name happen in Abraham's generation as well as Isaac, during a larger span of time where they don't believe it's the same person. So anyway, Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar, the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swore to your father, Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on the earth will be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions." Verse 6, so Isaac stayed in Gerar. And then, of course, you guys know the story of Abimelech and sort of wanting Isaac's wife, so some similar overlap with Abraham. And then the story picks up again in verse 12, where it says, "Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him." Right? So here you have a very sort of simple story. Isaac is going through a unique experience where he is predominantly experiencing a famine, and he is sort of seems like he's going, all right, I got to leave here, go somewhere where this isn't happening. So he's thinking about going to Egypt, and God steps in and says, "No, I'm actually asking you to press into this season of famine in this land, and not to run away, not to leave, but to stay here. And I'm going to prosper you in this difficult circumstance. I'm going to prosper you in a time where things seem impossible," right? And what might be difficult for us to understand about something as catastrophic as a famine is, as we all are experiencing now, and more realistically, it has been much worse in history, that famines are often accompanied by the falling apart of economic modes of operation, right? Sort of like you tend to see famines accompanied with like farmers losing their jobs and therefore trade going down, because if you don't have certain items that are being grown, then you can't make rope, you can't make baskets, you can't make a lot of different things. So it has a domino effect, right? So when they say famine, they don't just mean a lack of food, they mean like in everything that industry affects. So it's a whole thing, right? God isn't asking Isaac to do a small thing. God recognizes that this is a heavy thing he's asking Isaac, and something very heavy that Isaac is considering when he's making the decision not to leave but to stay and prosper. And what we see is when Isaac honors what God says, and when Isaac responds to what God's doing and believes for what God has for him, Isaac plants during a famine, and in that same year, he reaps 100-fold, right? And the beauty of that is, I think we so often tend to identify with other people so easily, and we make their victories our own, and we also make their failures our own. And so in times of like pandemics, in times of famine, in times where sort of global catastrophes begin to take place, we often take other people's experiences and sort of in light of ourselves, right? So Isaac could have said, everyone else is experiencing a famine. Everybody else is experiencing a lack of food growth, a lack of food security. I'm going to have that same experience too. But what actually ends up happening in Isaac's story is that he moves in opposition to what might be common in his time, and he has a completely different experience. And in reality, I think that is the whole point of a faith journey, is that for so many of us, we get sort of scared or nervous because it's just easier to live in comfort and more simpler to live in plenty. It's a lot harder to then try to be almost countercultural in sort of our own, in seasons of little to plant, in seasons of famine to try to live towards abundance. Like that's a lot more difficult to sort of mentally get there because we reflect the culture that we're a part of. We reflect the environments we find ourselves. And that's exactly what God is challenging Isaac to do. He says, I want you to be your own person. I want you to have your own separate testimony and story to how I prospered you when things were difficult for other people. Not just out of selfish gain, but God was well aware that that story, that Isaac's prosperity, would be the prosperity of others. And so I asked the question to you guys, right? What does it look like to be planting in our time, right? What does planting look like for us, right? And I don't want to get sort of I don't want to get locked up just in the example of Isaac, right? It's not just sort of an economical opportunity, right? For Isaac, it would have been sort of his small business, right? He has a farm, he has a flock, and he's investing in that. But for our case, what does that investment look like for us? What does planning look like for us? Does it look like our emotional health? Does it look like our mental health? Does it look like helping our neighbors? Does it look like developing a new skill set or a tool set that we didn't before? Does it look like connecting with people we don't otherwise connect with? Does it look like reading that book we didn't finish? What type of investment maybe do we have a unique opportunity that now to do? And I don't mean it from like a productivity standpoint, like, oh, look at all the things I've accomplished. But no, realistically from the reality of like, I can still prosper even now, right? I can still have it my own form of prosperity and my own form of elevation even now when things are difficult. You know, for me, one of the big things God's been speaking to is just learning to master my own thoughts in my own heart and really come to a different place in my own life. And it's easy to kind of look towards the outward and trying to control everything in the environment around me. But in that lack of control, I'm being reminded that the only thing I can control, the only thing I can master is myself, right? And so then it's like, okay, what does planning in my own heart and in my own thoughts and in my own life look like so that I may prosper in the future, right? So I'm asking, you know, what is it that maybe God might be asking you to plant in your life? And maybe it's something you've already started doing. Maybe it's just a garden. Maybe it's, again, connecting with an old friend. The second question I want to ask is specifically, what would prosperity actually look like in your first answer, right? Like, for some of us, if it's a skill set, you might think, oh, well, then maybe one day I'll get a job in that career. But does it? Is that really what God is prospering you towards? Maybe it's just that victory might roll into something else, right? So to sort of rethink what victory looks like, what prosperity looks like in the things that we plant. Because sometimes I think it's so easy to move towards like the monetary, or it's so easy to look towards like the quick turnaround, right? Sort of, we have a microwave generation or microwave sort of idea to the way we do things. It's like, make it fast, heat it up, eat quick, right? But what does that prosperity look like? If for some of us it's our emotional mental health, does it look like being able to find inner peace in times when things are difficult? Does it mean having better control of sort of our cynical thoughts? Whatever that is, what does prosperity look like for you guys? And then the last question, as generic as it might sound, in reality, I am asking this question because it is one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves, and realistically, the first one we forget about consistently. And if we don't have people in our lives, and if we're not ourselves reminding us of this question, someone should, right? And that question is, what is God? What is the Holy Spirit speaking to you right now? Like, seriously taking the opportunity to pause and ask that. And maybe that's really the first question you ask yourself after watching this video, is like, God, what are you saying? Holy Spirit, what are you saying? What are you doing? So that way we can really not just collaborate with God, but sort of bring ourselves up to speed to what his heart is towards and what he's speaking in our lives into the environment and the people around us. And then really the other two questions of what planting and prosperity looks like. I want us to ask those three questions because I think those are our baseline. That's our true north, right? It's like getting our internal compass and pointing true north, so that way we can get a better sense of direction of where we're supposed to go. Because it's easy to move with what the culture and the environment around us is doing. And that's not good or bad. It's just easy. It's all too simple. It's a lot harder to find a pulse for what God is doing or for what the new thing is that he might be accomplishing, and we can miss out on that. And for some of us, it could be something very simple, and for others, it could have many moving parts. And so I just want to get us thinking and talking in that direction. And yeah, I want to end with a quote. This one's by Solomon Thurup. He was the amazing New Yorker who ended up serving 12 years as a slave, right? He was, there was a film and a book. He authored a book that later on became a film. And it's an amazing, crazy journey of a free man who gets kidnapped and forced into slavery for 12 years of his life in Louisiana. And there's this quote from his book that the quote isn't all that special, but I think in light of his journey, it's a shocking sort of reflection. Right? You ever read a quote and it's like, oh, whatever, I've heard a million quotes. And then you kind of hear the story of the person and you're like, that quote means so much more now. And the quote is, whoops, there we go. All right, the quote is, at such times the heart of man turns instinctively towards his maker. In prosperity, and whenever there is nothing to injure or make him afraid, he remembers him not, in reference to God, and is ready to defy him. But place him in the midst of dangers, cut him off from human aid, let the grave open up before him. Then it is, in time of his tribulation, that the scoffer and unbelieving man turns to God for help, feeling there is no other hope or refuge or safety, save in his protecting arms, right? And so it's sort of that obvious idea that in times of prosperity we don't think of God, but in times of trial we think of him a lot and we recognize who he is. And so it's sort of like such a common idea, right? But to a man who was forced into slavery for 12 years, right? A complete injustice that might have felt like it had no end, right? In sight. There was something that he experienced and something that he learned that he walked away from that horrible experience carrying within himself. That in this time of great difficulty and trial, he saw God and he experienced God and ran into his arms. So I love you guys, praying for you guys. Super proud of seeing some of your posts on social media of how you guys are doing. Really excited that many of you guys are doing well. And even for those who have been struggling, that you've had the vulnerability and honesty to kind of open up and share it with others. So hope to hear from you guys. Feel free to comment in the comment section and let's chat. Love you guys.